Hello YouTube, how are you? My name's Jude, and welcome back to my channel. Today, with no UFC card this upcoming weekend, I decided to make a concept card for UFC 330. And UFC 330 will be taking place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on August 15th, I believe. And yeah, there's a lot of rumors circulating this card right now, but there have been no fights announced officially. And just a bit of a disclaimer, every single fighter that I put on this concept card is not booked at the present moment. And that's a bit unrealistic because I'm sure that somebody who will be fighting here within the next month will end up on this card. That's just how it is, but I'm not going to predict the outcome and then also predict someone making that quick of a turnaround. So, it could be a little bit unrealistic, but in terms of fighters who aren't booked, I tried to make a realistic numbered event for the UFC as they return to Philadelphia. But we'll get into it with the early prelim opener. For the early prelim opener, I put Carly Giudice taking on Eduardo Mora. And I think this is a pretty fun women's fight, to be honest. Eduardo Mora is ranked, and Carly Giudice is on a 3-fight win streak in the UFC. And Carly Giudice is actually a pretty entertaining striker to watch. She's pretty talented on the feet. And Eduardo Mora is no slouch either. I think this would be a pretty competitive fight, but a good chance for Carly Giudice to potentially get in the rankings. It would also be a good chance to see the improvements that Carly Giudice has made to her ground game and her overall wrestling and grappling game. But pretty fun fight here, and a good opportunity for the UFC to push Carly Giudice. Next fight on the card. This is a banger. If you guys know, you know. But Evan Elder versus Lance Gibson Jr. Evan Elder was booked to fight in September against Tom Nolan, but then he had a pretty devastating leg injury. I think he might have broke his leg or something like that, and has been out ever since. But I am hoping that pretty soon Evan Elder will have at least a fight announced, and I hope they put him on a numbered card. I think Evan Elder's really good, a really entertaining fighter to watch, and a really, really solid prospect to look out for in the lightweight division. Obviously, his debut loss to Preston Parsons has not aged well at all, but since then, he should honestly probably be undefeated since then. His only other loss was to Nazim Sadikov by a cut, but that was a fight that he was winning, and I don't think that cut was even really bad enough to stop the fight. I think Evan Elder kind of got shafted there, and should be 4-1 in the UFC, but he's 3-2. He's on a 3-fight win streak, and Lance Gibson is 1-1 in the UFC. Lost his debut to Bobby Green, but then came back and had a pretty impressive knockout win over Chase Hooper. A little biased here, but I do think that this is a good opportunity for Evan Elder to start climbing the ranks a little bit. Step up in competition for both guys, in my opinion. I think Evan Elder's a lot better than Chase Hooper, and I think Lance Gibson's a bit better than Gage Young, but Gage Young is a solid win. Evan Elder had a good performance over Gage Young in his last win, beat him 30-27, and we've seen Gage Young get 2 UFC wins since then. So that's not a bad win by any means. I think this is a really fun fight to be on the early prelims. But yeah, I would favor Evan Elder here. Get this out of the way. Hold on. Hope I can record this by the time. Okay, yeah, we should be good. All right, next early prelim, we have Dangerous Davy Grant versus Chris El Guapo Gutierrez. And yeah, this is a crafty matchup. This is Battle of the Old Heads. I think both these guys have been ranked at some point in the UFC bantamweight division. I know Chris Gutierrez has. I'm just going to assume that Davy Grant's been in there for at least a short period of time. If not, he's definitely deserved to be in there on several occasions. But Davy Grant, in his most recent fight, he was able to beat Adrian Luna Martinetti. He was able to come back from that tough loss to Charles Jourdain. And then Chris Gutierrez in his last fight dropped a relatively competitive one to Farid Basharat, but before that was able to beat John Castaneda. So I think this fight makes sense for both guys. Um, Both guys are towards the back end of their careers, but I think this is a nice opportunity for both guys to fight on a numbered card because they don't usually fight on numbered cards. And I think this is a good opportunity for the winner of this fight to potentially get a shot at the bottom of the rankings or right outside the rankings. Um, yeah, these guys deserve a showcase like this. They're both very entertaining. I think both guys are underrated, especially Chris Gutierrez, quite underrated in bantamweight, and then Davy Grant. What can I say? He's crafty and crafty. Um, but yeah, I like this matchup a lot, and I'd be very excited for this fight if it did end up getting booked. Hello? What happened? Hold on. There we go. Alright, next fight on the card, we have Chris Padilla versus Drakkar Klose. And Chris Padilla is another one of my favorite lightweights on the roster, along with Evan Elder. I really do like Chris Padilla. Felt like he kind of got robbed in his last fight against Marco Medeiros. I do think he should have won that fight, but that ended up going to majority draw. And then Drakkar Klose in his last fight, coming off a win over Edson Barboza. Before that, got dismantled by Joel Alvarez. And before that was on a little bit of a streak. Drakkar Klose was. Chris Padilla was on a streak before his last fight, 4-fight win streak. I think this fight makes sense for both guys. This might be a bit of a step down for Chris Padilla from Marco Medeiros, but I think Marco Medeiros and Drakkar Klose are pretty similar in terms of skill level. But I would favor Chris Padilla here. I just think this is a better matchup for him. I don't think Drakkar Klose hits quite as hard or is as clean or as technical. I would like Chris Padilla to get this one done. I hope they give him another shot on a numbered card. I think he deserves it. And I do think that he's someone that the UFC can push. Alright, now we move on to the regular prelims. And this is another sick fight in my opinion. We have Chuck Buffalo, Charles Radke, who's 5-2 in the UFC. Then we have Carlos the Human Pimple Leal, who's 2-2 in the UFC, but should be 3-1. That fight with Renat, he definitely won in his debut, but it says loss when you look at the history books. And then he beat Alex Morono, lost to Muslim Salikov, and then most recently beat Chidi Njokwani in a back and forth war. And then Charles Radke, coming off a win over Francisco Prado. Before that, was able to beat Daniel Frenza. The 5 wins that Charles Radke does have in the UFC are pretty low level. They're guys that are towards the bottom of the division, or were towards the bottom of the division when he beat them. And yeah, I think this is probably a step up for both guys and a very fun competitive fight. I think if this one stays on the feet, Carlos Leal has the advantage, but Charles Radke's also pretty good on the feet. But if this goes to the ground, I think Charles Radke does have the advantage, but I don't think this fight would go to the ground. I think this would be primarily on the feet. Carlos Leal, back and forth war here, but I would pick Carlos Leal to win this fight. I'm not sure what steroids he's on that doesn't get detected by drug testing, but it's working for him, so shout out Carlos Leal, I guess. We move on to our next prelim. We got Superman, Ryan Spann, versus Marcin Tybura. And even though this isn't an MSG, I think Ryan Spann would light him up. Superman's going to light him up. I think this is a logical next step for Ryan Spann. He made his heavyweight debut, lost to Waldo Cortez Acosta, but he was having moments in that fight. It was competitive on the feet early, and then Waldo just kind of took over and was able to finish Ryan Spann. But since then, got a finish over Lucas Dresky, and most recently got a second-round knockout over Marcus Buchecha. And I think this is a relatively similar matchup to the Marcus Buchecha one for him, even though Marcin Tybura is obviously a lot more proven and has had success in the UFC, whereas Buchecha hasn't. But I think Marcin Tybura is on his way out here. Losing to Ante Dalia in the first round isn't a great look. And then more recently, dropped a decision to Tyrell Fortune in a fight where neither guy looked very good at all. And I think Ryan Spann possesses a similar level of danger that Ante Dalia has, and I think that Ryan Spann would be able to put away Marcin Tybura on the feet. I do think that Ryan Spann deserves another shot in the heavyweight rankings, and the UFC should try to get him in there, which is kind of why I gave him a favorable matchup in the rankings. There's a couple guys at the bottom of the rankings that would be a lot tougher for Ryan Spann, but I think this makes the most sense if we're going to get Ryan Spann in the rankings to have him face Marcin Tybura. I would pretty confidently pick Ryan Spann here. I think this is a good matchup for him and a pretty bad matchup for Tybura. I'm pretty proud of this prelim too, to be honest with you. Got Tagirul Bekov versus Joseph Bopo Morales. I really like Bopo Morales, I'm not going to lie. He's grown on me a lot because he looked really, really good against Alibi Idris in a fight that I thought Idris was going to win. And I think a lot of people thought Idris was going to win that fight. And Joseph Morales came out and schooled him. I think he finished him with a triangle in that fight. And then after that, more recently, he was briefly ranked at the bottom of the rankings after beating Matt Schnell, which you'll hear that and be like, Matt Schnell's not a very good win. But the way that he beat Matt Schnell was impressive because he took it into Matt Schnell's world, which is on the ground, and he was just able to dominate Matt Schnell on the ground. He proved to have the way better jiu-jitsu, the way better grappling, the way better scrambling than Matt Schnell, and that's what Matt Schnell is good at. That's what Matt Schnell's always been good at. And then we have Tagirul Bekov, who's, he's a wrestler, but Tagirul Bekov had a pretty dicey fight against Clayton Carpenter, and then more recently he had an even dicier fight against Azat Maxim. And I just really have not been impressed with Tagirul Bekov at all. I think the striking is relatively even in this one, but I do think that Joseph Morales has a lot better ground game than Tagirul Bekov does. And I wouldn't be surprised if this fight were to take place if Joseph Morales would be able to submit Tagirul Bekov. I think Joseph Morales is actually pretty good. I think he's a top 10 level UFC flyweight, and I hope they give him a shot in the rankings because like I said, he was briefly ranked after the Matt Schnell fight. He's been calling out Steve Urseg, guys like that. I think this is a good way to get Joseph Morales cemented in the rankings and to boot Tagirul Bekov out of there. Now we're going to move on to the featured prelim. Before you say anything about how Pat Sabatini doesn't deserve it, how he's a terrorist of the sport, how he's had such a terrible performance in his last fight, you do have to consider Pat Sabatini's 9-2 in the UFC. He's on a four-fight win streak, and his most recent loss was to Diego Lopez. But 9-2 in the UFC, 4-fight win streak, was able to beat Jonathan Pierce, Joanderson Brito, Chepe Mariscal, and William Gomez all in a row. And regardless of how you're beating those guys, those are four pretty solid wins to put together in a row. And I think he probably should be rewarded with a shot in the rankings at this point. And Pat Sabatini, I think, is a Philly guy, so that's kind of why I also put him on this card. And then Aaron Pico is looking to return in July or August. I think he'll be wrestling on the Real American Freestyle card coming up here in either June or July. But I think he'd be ready to make this turnaround and fight Pat Sabatini. The main reason that I gave Sabatini this matchup is because I do think that Pico probably smokes him and knocks him out cold. We've seen Pat Sabatini struggle with striking defense in the past. He got caught by Diego Lopez leaving the clinch with his hands down. And if he tries to wrestle Aaron Pico here, I think Aaron Pico is gonna be able to counter wrestle him really well and keep this wherever he wants it. I think Pico could also probably be able to take Pat Sabatini down, and then I don't know what Pat Sabatini would really be able to do except to roll for a heel. But I think if this fight ends up on the feet, if Pat Sabatini's stuck on the feet for like 2 or 3 minutes with Aaron Pico, I think Aaron Pico is going to knock him out. I do think it makes sense though. Pat Sabatini, 4-fight win streak. Aaron Pico, ranked number 13 at featherweight, 1-1 in the UFC. His only win is Patricio Pitbull, and Patricio Pitbull's only win is Dan Ige. So, I think this makes sense to make Pico fight down just once, and then after this, give Pico a shot up the rankings. But I like this for a featured prelim. I think it makes sense. I'm a little bit biased towards Aaron Pico and Jackson Wink guys in general because I go to school in Albuquerque, but I do just think Aaron Pico is quite good, and I think he'd be able to make Pat Sabatini look pretty easy in this fight. Opening up the main card, I decided to put Wonder Boy's retirement fight on here. And originally, I'm not gonna lie, a couple days ago when I was first drafting this card up, I put Wonder Boy versus Colby Covington. I kind of thought it might be a double retirement fight, but then either yesterday or the day before, it was announced that Colby Covington is retiring from the UFC without a retirement fight. Bit of an interesting move. Bit of a unceremonious retirement, you know? But yeah, I was kind of thinking of who I could give Wonder Boy for his retirement fight. I was bouncing around like Daniel Rodriguez, but honestly, Daniel Rodriguez is on a 3-fight win streak. Wonder Boy's on a 3-fight losing streak, even though he got shafted in that fight against Gabriel Bonfim and should have won that fight based on the second and third round. I don't know how the judges gave that one to Bonfim, but it's a shame that they did. Before that, he was actually beating Joaquin Buckley before he got stuck against the fence and put away. And then before that, just a really bad matchup against Rachmanov. But Neil Magny is 2-1 in his last 3. Put 2 wins in a row together, and then got submitted by Yaroslav Amosov pretty effortlessly in his most recent fight. I had to triple check that these guys have never fought each other before because it just seems like this fight has happened before. But no, it hasn't. It was booked at one point, but then Magny got rebooked, so this fight never took place. 2 guys who are pretty old in this division. Neil Magny, I think, has the most wins ever at welterweight, if I'm not mistaken. And then Wonder Boy, obviously a legend of the game. But yeah, I think this is a solid matchup. I think it fits with the theme that we've seen recently of the first fight on a main card being unranked guys who have name value. We saw that with Jeremy Stevens versus Bobby Green, and there's countless other examples that I just can't think of right now. But yeah, I think this is a good fight, good retirement fight potentially for Wonder Boy, and a winnable retirement fight for Wonder Boy. I'd love to see Wonder Boy retire with a win, and I think Neil Magny is a matchup where he can definitely do that, as long as he is able to keep it standing. But Neil Magny really isn't a super imposing grappler. I would favor Wonder Boy here, and I really do like Wonder Boy. I'll be really sad when he retires. Then we have our next fight on the main card. We have Jamal Hill versus Dominic Reyes. And yeah, I shuffled this one around a bunch. Originally, I was going to do Reyes versus Guskov, and then I was thinking maybe Reyes versus Ozdemir 2, or maybe even Reyes versus a De Ridder. But then I just thought Reyes was actually on a pretty good streak before that Carlos Ulberg lost. And since then, even though the fight was boring, not a lot happened, he was able to beat Johnny Walker. So I do think that Reyes deserves a bit more than that. I think they should give him a shot up the rankings. And right now, Jamal Hill's ranked number 6. Dominic Reyes is ranked 11. Jamal Hill's on a 3-fight losing streak. Lost to Pereira at UFC 300, then lost to Yuri Prohaska, and then lost to Khalil Roundtree in his most recent fight. Don't really love the layoff for Jamal Hill. Haven't heard a lot from him, to be honest. This would be a tricky one to pick, though. I think this would be an interesting fight on the feet. I think this is a good opportunity for Reyes to get close to the top 5, and I think he deserves it because Ulberg being the only loss that he's had in the past 2 years, pretty impressive. And then obviously Jamal Hill needs to fight down in the rankings and give somebody a shot to take his spot. All right, our featured fight, we have Sean Brady versus Kamaru Usman. And just a quick note for this one, both of these guys have said that they don't want to fight back in the division at all. Sean Brady said he wouldn't fight back unless it made a lot of sense for his career, but I do think that this one makes a lot of sense for his career. Sean Brady's ranked number 6 right now. Kamaru Usman's ranked number 8. Usman hasn't fought since the Buckley fight, and then Sean Brady's probably had 2 or 3 fights since then. Obviously lost to Michael Morales, but more recently, had a great performance over Joaquin Buckley, probably an even better performance than Usman had. And I think the way you sell this to Sean Brady without him fighting up in the rankings is that this is one of the best welterweights ever, former champion, and they both had their most recent opponent was a common opponent. So I think this fight makes sense. I think you could talk Sean Brady into taking this. I don't think he's as close-minded as somebody like a Joe Pyfer, who we'll get to in a second. But I think this is a great grappling matchup. I think Usman would have the slight edge on the feet here, but I would find it very, very hard to pick against Sean Brady based on his last performance and based on the Leon Edwards performance. It's starting to look like that Michael Morales thing, more of a one-off, but then again, Michael Morales is huge, super physically imposing, and yeah, I just think this would make a great featured fight. Sean Brady obviously fights out of Philly, so I think he'd like to be on this card. I was gonna give him like a Yaroslav Amosov, but I think he'd decline that fight probably. So hopefully, maybe we could see Usman versus Brady. I think this would be a sick fight. But getting back to the Joe Pyfer thing, I was originally trying to put Joe Pyfer on the card. I was going to do like Joe Pyfer versus Caio Borralho in either the featured fight or where the Jamal Hill versus Dominic Reyes fight is. But I was doing a tiny bit of research. I was looking up UFC 330 fight rumors. And one of the articles that came up was talking about how Joe Pyfer was so angry that the UFC hadn't reached out to him about fighting on UFC 330. But Joe Pyfer's stipulations for fighting on UFC 330 is that he wants to be either the main or the co-main event. And yeah, it's no wonder the UFC hasn't reached out to him, because in what world is Joe Pyfer a numbered event, co-main, or main event? It's not the world we're living in. I was starting to think that the salty gimmick that Joe Pyfer had was a bit funny, but it's really not a gimmick. I just think he's a bit of a tool, dude. Like, obviously he'd knock me out with one punch. I probably wouldn't say this shit to his face, but yeah, Joe Pyfer is just a very unlikable dude. He's refusing to fight in his home state just because he's not going to be in the co-main or the main event. It's like, dude, get over yourself. You're ranked number 6 at middleweight. Your best win's Israel Adesanya. Like, you'd be lucky to be the featured fight on this card. But I digress. Joe Pyfer is not on this card, though. This is our co-main event in place of the great Joe Pyfer. And obviously, this could be Merab versus Peter Yan 3, but I'm not sure. There hasn't been any, as crazy as it sounds, every numbered event up until July has been announced, and not a single women's title fight has taken place this year. Nunes versus Harrison was supposed to happen on the first pay-per-view of the year, but that has not even been rebooked. It hasn't materialized, and I think Dern should be ready to fight again, because her last fight was in October. Wei Li's last fight was in November. I think both of them should probably be ready to fight again. Wei Li obviously vacated the belt, and that's how Mackenzie Dern ended up with it. Wei Li tried to go up and fight Valentina Shevchenko, but she got dominated in that fight. Shevchenko just showed levels. She was too big, too physically imposing for her. But I think this is a much more approachable matchup for Zhang Wei Li against Mackenzie Dern, who, yeah, Mackenzie Dern's main threat is on the ground, but Zhang Wei Li looked really, really good against Tatiana Suarez, and I could see this one going pretty similarly. I think I would lean Zhang Wei Li. I'd like to see Zhang Wei Li get back in the cage, and I hope that they do just straight away give her a shot to earn her belt back, because I think she's definitely deserved that. And then we're going to get into our main event. You guys probably could have guessed what this main event is based on some of the other fights on this card, and also based on just the overwhelming rumors that have been circulating regarding this card. But our main event is for the welterweight championship between Islam Makhachev and Ian Gary. And I honestly do think that Ian Gary is the most deserving contender to fight for the belt right now, more so than Morales. more so than Prates because he beat Prates. But yeah, Ian Gary's only loss is to Shavkat Rakhmonov, who's gone MIA for about 2 or 3 years now. I feel like Shavkat Rakhmonov just disappeared. And honestly, I think the UFC needs to maybe start considering removing him from the rankings at this point. He's just been squatting there for 2 years. And I know there's been the injuries, but you can't just squat in the rankings without fighting, you know? But Ian Gary, since then, able to beat Carlos Prates and able to beat former champion Bilal Muhammad as well. So Ian Gary's really starting to put it together here. I do think he deserves a shot. I do think this press conference will be big. This will be Islam's first title defense at welterweight after that dominant victory over Jack Della Maddalena. This is a different matchup, though. I think Ian Gary is a much better grappler, much more hard to track down on the feet, and I think Ian Gary's striking style could potentially give Islam some issues, but really hard to pick against Islam, even though we just saw Chimaev lose. It's still really hard for me to pick against Islam. I would be secretly rooting for Ian Gary, though. I do think it'd be kind of funny if Ian Gary ended up with the belt. I say that until it actually happens, though, because then he'd probably be obnoxious again. But I think that's going to do it for my UFC 330 concept card. Let me know if there's any matchups that you guys like, dislike, would change, or completely scrap or add. This isn't supposed to be like a prediction or anything of what the card's going to be. It's just a card that I would like to see. I think a realistic card. I don't think this is an unrealistic. These are unrealistic expectations at all for a numbered event. But yeah, I'd be happy with this. Let me know what you guys think. I could have stacked it a little bit more, but I was just trying to be realistic. The UFC doesn't usually stack cards much more than this one was. And there are a lot of really sneaky good fights that I put on the prelims. So I hope that some of you guys are able to appreciate that. But that pretty much does it. Thank you guys very much for all the support that I've been getting. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the subscribers. Shout out Artem MMA for commenting on my last video. I think he subscribed as well. So Artem, if you're seeing this, shout out you, dude. Shout out my barber, David. I got a haircut today. He did a really good job. That's my boy. And then also shout out my girlfriend, Ray. I told her I'd shout her out. I love you, Ray. Thank you for commenting and supporting my videos as well. But that'll do it for me today. I'll see you guys next week with UFC Macau predictions. Peace out.